This is a story about an abandoned house that was on our street when we were kids. We used to walk by it on our way to the store for our mama. It was said, of course, that it was haunted, as kids everywhere will tell you all big old empty houses are. Well, one day on a dare, my brother and me and some of his friends decided to go exploring in this creepy old house. Although it was just a little ways back from the street, none of the neighbors noticed or paid any attention to us as we hurried up the overgrown path to the front porch. We peered through the glass on the door, but an old, tattered lace curtain, along with the dust, obscured our view. Couldn't really see what was inside, but we were very curious. We rattled the doorknob, and amazingly, it was unlocked. Well, you know what that means. There was no stopping us now, so we crept inside. Suddenly, upon entering the old house, though, it was as if we'd stepped back in time. Although it was a hot summer day, the house felt cool and dark, like a cloud covered the sun. It took a few seconds for our eyes to adjust to the darkness. We were standing in some sort of foyer. It seemed much bigger inside, and it had high ceilings. The dark wooden floor was covered in dust and grime that looked like it hadn't been stirred in years. Even our shoes left tracks in the dust as we walked about. The plaster and the yellowed lilac wallpaper was peeling off the walls. You could even smell the mold and neglect in the air. I began to wonder who had lived there. Where had they gone? Why had they abandoned this place? Well, we spread out and started exploring in the different rooms leading out from the foyer. There wasn't much furniture, just a few odds and ends here and there. It looked as if someone had ransacked the place, taken what they wanted, and leaving the rest in disarray. In one small room off to the right was a piece of furniture like I had never seen before. It was a type of writing desk, I think. It was tall and had lots of little drawers and cubby holes. Even being old, it was beautiful. It was a light-colored wood that seemed to glow, regardless of the dust that covered it. I ran my fingers across the dust, leaving a trail, and opened the little drawers. But there was no treasures inside, just yellowed, tattered old papers. Oh, how I wish now that I had paid more attention to that. But being a kid, that's not the thing that you're interested in. But this still was the most interesting room in the old house to me, 'cause I spotted a big old trunk next to the wall. It was long and it had a flat top. It was sort of creepy because it looked to be the perfect size for holding a body and was even shaped like a coffin. My imagination was getting the better of me. Still, I couldn't resist lifting the lid to see what was inside. Ah, it was just a dusty, moldy old soldier's uniform neatly laid out, and some war trinkets, including some type of sword. There was a folded flag with 13 stars on an X. Now, I believe it was a Confederate flag, but then it was just an old flag to me. I handled the uniform gently, wondering who had worn it and what was their story. But I put it all back into the trunk like I had found it. My brother and his friends came into the room then, and they seemed a little more impressed with the soldier's uniform. Then, at about the same time, we all spotted a flag hanging on the wall above the trunk. It was a United States flag, but not any like we had ever seen, because right in the middle of the flag there was a black cat sewn in. The cat had its hackles up, as if it was about to pounce, and it looked menacing. Well, that freaked us out for sure. It was getting dark out, And with no lights, it just started feeling creepier by the minute in that old house. I told my brother and his friends we had better get out of there, so we left and we decided we'd go back another day. The next time we tried to enter the old house, an old woman that lived next door to it stopped us. We called her crazy because she would sit on her front porch and yell at folks when they walked by her house. Sometimes she'd even stop you and talk crazy to you, asking you to come in for cookies and stuff. We thought maybe she was a witch, with our wild imaginations. She looked wild, and you could tell she wasn't quite right. You did your best to avoid her. Well, on this particular day, she stopped us, and she told us she'd call the police if we went into that house. Well, that scared us a little. We decided to wait again until a better time. Then, after thinking about it and discussing it a while, I came up with a plan. I looked in the phone book and called one of the most prominent attorneys in town. I won't say who. I told him I was going to do a report in school on old abandoned houses in the area, and that there was one on our street. I thought I could actually really do a report on that. So I really wasn't telling a story. Anyway, I asked him if he knew who owned it and if I could get permission to enter it. He asked me the address of the house and told me to call him back in a few days. Well, it was all I could think about those few days, but I finally made the call. He told me that the man that owned the house had inherited it and was living in California. He said the man wanted nothing to do with it, and the house was shortly to be torn down, and everything in it was going to be hauled to the dump. He gave me permission to go in, but told me to be especially careful as it was in bad shape. I couldn't wait to tell my brother. I wasn't about to go into that big old house by myself. Well, we decided to go in on a particular day, and of course, the old witch woman tried to stop us again. We were ready for her this time, though. When she said she'd call the police, we told her to go ahead. Well, I don't know if she called them or not, but they never came. More than likely, they just thought she was crazy too. We walked into the house this time a little more confidently. It was still dark inside, but we didn't care. It was sort of disheartening, though, to see personal belongings strewn about on the floor, collecting dust. Old clothes and knickknacks and such I could understand, but loose photos and picture albums made me sad. I knelt down on the floor and picked up some of the old black and white photos. Thin rays of sun from the grime-covered windows highlighted the dust motes like beams of light over their faces. I thought, who were these people? What were their lives like? And the biggest question of all, why didn't they want any of these pictures? Another room had a long table in it, stretched almost across the whole room. It was covered in an unorganized fashion with all sorts of knickknacks and dishes and Christmas bows and old Christmas wrapping paper and cards, stuff like that. On one end of it were stacks of brand new men's shirts still in packages. How strange. We thought, why would anyone just leave these things lying here, abandoned? From that room, going into another room, there were two round-top chests sitting on the floor. This excited us. They looked like treasure chests. We opened them, and there was the usual old clothes in them and some old letters. We dug around to the bottom of one of them and found some long old socks or stockings that were tied at the bottom. We untied them to see what was in them. Lo and behold, it was old silver dollars. Now that was like treasure to us. There was 3 or 4 of them. Our mama collected old coins, so we decided to take them home to her. The stuff was going to be hauled to the dump anyway, so we didn't think it would hurt. The dates on them were in the 1800s. In a room in the very back of the house, there was an old, upright piano. It was it was like it was tucked into a little closet almost. I almost barely didn't find it. But it was not just any plain old piano. It was very intricate, with all sorts of scroll work and carvings in it. An old yellow songbook was open on the piano ledge above the keys. For some odd reason, I just couldn't figure out why it was wedged into this dark closet covered with layers of dust. I had gone into this room alone, and I could tell this was one of those old player pianos. Even through all the dust, the piano was so beautiful. I tapped the old cold yellow keys just to see if it worked. The melodic notes echoed loudly in the empty house. I wondered what it sounded like in its heyday, bringing joy and music to happy souls gathered around it, probably right here in this house. I just couldn't understand why it was left here, as if it was nothing. I wished like heck I could pick that piano up and take it home with me. But of course I couldn't, and so here it sat. No one to hear it, no one to play it, the final interlude with no encores. My brother came in about that time to tell me he was leaving. He was anxious and excited to take the coins to our mama. It was sort of getting dark outside, so I didn't want to be left in this big old house alone, so we returned to the front door. But before we went out, I asked my brother to wait just for a minute. I needed to get something. I went back into the room that had the pictures thrown all over the floor. I scooped up as many as I could, along with the album and some old letters. I just couldn't bear to leave them there to be hauled to the dump. Our mama was interested in the photos and letters. She enjoyed reading them. They were from an earlier time, late 18 and early 1900s. She did some research on the coins, and they weren't really all that valuable, but she kept them in her collection a long time. I don't know what happened to them after that. Some of the photos we brought her were loose, and some were taped into the album with black corner tape. Some were children. One was a high school class, Andalusia High School, of 1924. But none of the photos had names. Mama gave them to our grandfather. He took them to the newspaper to see if they could be identified. I guess he asked around some too. Some of the students in the class photo were identified, but nobody claimed any of the photos, so Granddaddy gave them back to Mama. I don't know what happened to all of them, but I found a few that Mama had kept. The strangest thing I found in that house was a threatening letter laying on the floor. It was to a Miss, uh, I'm just going to say Smith. It said she was going to die that night. It had a skull and crossbones drawn on it. It was sort of creepy, but looked like maybe a kid up to no good had written it. At our age, that letter sent our minds to racing. We were sure we had a mystery on our hands, kind of like in the Hardy Boys books we used to read. I still have that letter today, though it's crumbly, yellowed, and barely readable. It wasn't long after that I came home from school one day, and walking by the house, saw the city trucks there, hauling things out of the house to the dump. I felt a chill and a deep sense of sadness come over me. After a couple of days, everything was gone. The house was empty. I have no idea what happened to that beautiful antique piano and writing desk, or even the roll-top chest and the soldier's uniform. I hope they salvaged those things somehow. It just seems so wrong that such treasures that were once special to somebody were now being disposed of in such a way. Our family was having a house of our own built during this time, and so we moved away from Oak Street not long after that to our new house. The abandoned house was eventually torn down, and a new brick building now stands in its place. Some sort of business with a circular blacktop drive and parking area. Maybe most people don't know or even care that a family once lived in a house on this lot. But when passing by, I can't help but wonder how life had come and gone from this place, and I feel a little ache in my heart for what used to be. I hope you enjoyed this story. It is at last my report on an old abandoned houses, only it's just one house, but in a way, it seems as if it's the way many, many houses have ended up, demolished and forgotten. Thank you for listening.